Would you like to start a cozy little farm? Would you like to mine for ores? Would you like to fight eldritch abominations? Would you like to make new friends? How about beseeching the old gods? Cowering beneath a blood moon? Or fishing? Well, welcome to Elderfield has all of those things and more. Welcome to the first devlog for Welcome to Elderfield, a cozy horror farming RPG which brings together a variety of genres to create a game that I hope will be unlike anything you've ever played before. It's been 1 year now since development to Welcome to Elderfield began, and the first playable demo has just released on Steam and itch.io. I'd like to spend this video going over what the past year of game dev has been like, and how we got to the point of finally having a playable game. And by we, I actually mean I, because this is a solo dev project. It all started in October of last year. Ideas for a video game had been bouncing around in my head for a while at that point, but there was just one problem. I have no idea how to make video games. For those who don't know me, basically anyone finding this randomly on YouTube, rather than being directed here from my other channel, Ill-Advised Records, I'm primarily a musician and visual artist. Programming, however, is something I know almost nothing about. Many years ago, I had the itch to make a game, purchased Game Maker Studio, and spent a good bit of time learning GML, the scripting language for Game Maker, and actually made a decent little bit of progress toward making a basic game. Life quickly caught up, however, and the project got scrapped, and all the game-making knowledge I had gained immediately left my brain to make room for other things. But the itch to make a game never really left. I've always been the sort of person that can't just enjoy something. I get so inspired when I listen to music, look at art, or play video games that I just can't help but want to join in and make my own. For some people, they get an idea for a game and are so excited about it that they just have to learn how to make games so they can make their dream game. My path into game dev has actually been quite the opposite. If messing about in Game Maker taught me anything, it was just how hard it is to make a full game. I had made a lot of progress in my short time with the engine. I built a movement system, a day-night cycle, basic combat, and working inventory system, and more. But some of the features I never got to were the most daunting to me. Those being a quest system and a save system. I learned that I did have what it took to absorb the information and put together something playable, but also that the mountain of learning that is required to make a game with no programming knowledge is high, and that I would likely have to spend a lot of time doing things that I don't enjoy as much as making music, art, and planning the actual gameplay. So, how did I end up making a game? Well, there are 3 games that, above all others, contributed to this project actually getting started. The first, as obvious as it probably is, was Stardew Valley. This wasn't so much a game that, after playing, I decided I want to make a farming sim, but it was highly inspirational in its approach to systems-based gameplay. I found myself enamored with the idea of building a world, not just a path the player is meant to take throughout a storyline. The rivers are filled with fish, you can grow any crops you like, there are recipes to unlock, house upgrades to buy, NPCs with their own little lives. It taught me that you don't even really need a storyline in the traditional sense, as long as the world the player is dropped into is interesting enough, and the core gameplay loop is strong enough. From the moment I played Stardew Valley, I couldn't stop thinking about the sort of world I would build, what mechanics it would have, and how they would work. I didn't think I would ever have the tools or knowledge to actually make something, but it was fun just to think through the logic of how all these little features work together. The second game that inspired me was World of Horror. I'm a massive fan of the work of Junji Ito, and J-horror in general, horror manga in general, and I'm also a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, so this game was a day one buy for me. The visuals were beautiful and the gameplay was engaging, but the most important aspect for me, and why this game was so inspiring, was this game is simple. The combat is turn-based and doesn't have a ton of flashy animations. The exploration is largely a variety of simple scenes that play out through 2D images, and most of the gameplay happens through a series of menus. This planted an important seed in my mind. A game doesn't need to be complicated to be fun, and it doesn't need to be high fidelity to absolutely ooze atmosphere. As an artist and musician first, and programmer last, this gave me hope that leaning to my strengths and doing something basic where I'm weakest could still produce something I could be happy with. The final game which inspired me, and the one that tipped me over the edge from daydreaming about making a game to actually making one, was none other than Fear and Hunger. Fear and Hunger is brutally hard. It is unforgiving, heavily luck-based, you can't save often, and death is always around the corner. That might not sound very cozy, but it wasn't its coziness that inspired me. Rather, it was the engine it was built in. Fear and Hunger is an RPG Maker game, an engine known for its simplicity, ease of use, and limited potential. You could probably count the number of truly successful RPG Maker games on one or two hands, but despite the engine's limitations, Fear and Hunger was a hit. Albeit a slow burn hit, but still a hit. The game itself isn't flashy, the animations are basic, the artwork is 2D and sprite-based, the movement is old-school, four-directional, the menus are a bit clunky, and overall the game looks like it was made in RPG Maker. It doesn't do much to hide this fact, and honestly, it doesn't need to. The game isn't great because it looks like it was made in a great engine. It's great because it's great. It's an exciting challenge, has lots of wild moments for streamers to react to, has a ton of depth and complexity, and a unique, captivating art style. All this without doing anything too crazy. It has the basic turn-based combat of most RPG Maker games. The menus and equipment system is pretty much just the stock system you get when you first boot up the engine, and none of this really matters. It does great things with the tools available, and that's all that it needed. This was the final straw. I knew I could put emphasis on what I'm good at. I knew I didn't need to make a super complicated game for it to feel exciting or immersive, and I had now seen a game pull these concepts off in the most beginner-friendly engine imaginable. It was time to make a game. But what game? All this time spent thinking of what mechanics or systems would be cool, or of what engine would work, and I hadn't given much thought at all to an actual game concept. All I knew was that I wanted to build a world that the player could explore, and that was it. So, I turned to a world that I had already built, the world of the Weather Channel. These days, I've been wearing the game dev hat, but what I'm most known for on the internet is the musician/record label owner hat. My other channel, Ill-Advised Records, is a record label that I use to release my own music, the music of others, and a variety of other art and media projects as they come to mind. I've released horror zines, albums, I've pressed vinyl. I've also put together an ongoing podcast and music album series called The Weather Channel. It has long been a fan favorite on the label, and it consists of a variety of lo-fi hip-hop tracks interspersed with recorded weather updates. Radio-style news updates about the bizarre happenings of a fictional, unnamed town, heavily inspired by Welcome to Night Vale, The Curlean Frequency, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Lovecraftian horror, and other such things. The series is a mix of horror and dark comedy, using the absurdity and horror of the happenings for comedic effect, towing the line between unsettling and humorous. The world of the Weather Channel already has a cast of characters, locations, strange customs, and all of the things you need to build a world. So I figured I would use that as the starting point. My other channel also has a sort of mascot character, the Dark Lo-Fi Girl, a riff on the famous Lo-Fi Girl character, but more like if she didn't get much sleep and had more concerning things to study. I figured she would be a great main character, and so with that, I had what I needed to start making a game. Well, everything but the game, that is. Booting up RPG Maker for the first time was a little daunting, but nowhere near as daunting as booting up any other engine for the first time. RPG Maker is kind of like having a finished game thrust in front of you, and rather than building everything up from the beginning, you change what's already there, taking out what you don't need, replacing things with your own assets, and tweaking things to suit your game. As you gradually do more of this, it becomes clear what you'll need to change, build for yourself, and replace. From here, there are tons of tutorials, scripting options, community-made plugins available to add more functionality to the engine, and sculpt exactly what you had envisioned. There are certainly limitations, but I often found that these limitations were more in how you approach solving a problem compared to a typical engine, more so than things that just can't be done. For all its limitations, I found RPG Maker MZ to actually have enough benefits to outweigh them. There were some hurdles early on, but within a couple of months, I had laid enough groundwork that my game was starting to feel the way I wanted it to. I was loading graphics the way I liked, movement was a bit limited but had a nice retro feel to it. Customizing the combat system led to a very World of Horror-esque style of combat that really emphasized the strange creatures the player would encounter. And getting a quest system and an NPC dialogue system working was a breeze, with a few plugins added. The list of plugins grew and grew, and before long, it hardly felt like an RPG Maker game anymore, as very few parts of the core engine had gone untouched. At this point, I still hadn't fully decided on what the game would be, but I had decided on a few core ideas. One was that I wanted to include hand-drawn elements, inspired by the artwork of Junji Ito and Western comic books. The second was that I wanted random chance to influence many aspects of the game, but without feeling unfair or too challenging. The third was that I wanted encounters to occur in set locations, and for the player to have to push through areas as far as they can get, finding new things, and eventually having to either turn back or die. Dying would reset the encounters, adding a sense of caution to exploration. I knew that I wanted to limit the player's ability to heal freely, and for the player to rely on a World of Horror-style bathing system to regain health when they really had no choice. But this would reset the enemies and would present a tactical decision in deciding when to heal. I figured this approach would add a bit of tension to the exploration, and a sense that anything lurking around the corner could spell trouble. It also allowed the player to gauge when to press on, and when to turn back and regroup. At this point, the game wasn't a cozy one, but it did have an exploration focus that fit in well with the horror-influenced setting. As I developed these features, I eventually added a time system and a day and night cycle. This was what really led to the game becoming what it is now. Being a big fan of farming sim games like Stardew Valley, when ideas relating to the time system popped into my head which served more to add life to the world than challenge, I didn't resist them. At first I thought it would be cool to add some NPCs to the game, and maybe where they show up and what they can say can depend on the time, the day of the week, what you've done so far, and so on. Adding some basic characters already added a sense of independent life to the game. What really tipped things over the edge into cozy game territory, however, was the farming system. At first, it was more of an experiment. RPG Maker is not known for its ability to handle complex systems, and usually when you see something like a farming system in an RPG Maker game, it's very rudimentary and often menu-heavy and clunky. I didn't want to repeat the sins of other developers, and wanted to stick to what the engine was good at. But I also wanted to see what I could come up with, and to see if maybe I could find a way to make something that worked as well as any other engine. So after a few days of messing around, I actually managed to get a system that I liked working. It wasn't quite like other farming games in the sense that you just hoe the ground on any old tile and plant anywhere, as it was limited to more of a farming plot system with preset tillable soil patches. But I was able to make these plots large and still give the player a ton of room to plant different crops. What was more was that some of the limitations had even opened up a new possibility. Because I had to limit where the player could plant, I was able to separate these plots into self-contained spaces, which could be influenced together in a variety of ways. I added platforms where players could place farming effigies or ritual brazier, cosmetic object spots, and scarecrows. These placeable objects would add bonus effects to the whole farming plot, allowing for a sort of cosmetic customization minigame to the farm, which had a ton of possibilities for making unique farms, suited to growing certain kinds of crops, being more self-sufficient, having higher yields, or more risk versus reward. With all of this, it was clear farming was going to be in the game, which actually worked out kind of perfectly. You see, I had already added a cooking mechanic to craft the food the player would need to stay alive on their excursions, and was planning to make the ingredients a carefully balanced resource, which would be used to direct the player's gameplay. If they ran out, they would have to risk resetting the enemies by dying or bathing, or play it safe and do other content to make money, buy stuff, find loot, do gathering tasks, and more. With the addition of farming, I now had a way to balance this. The farming made the food allowed for exploration, and when exploration could lead to new upgrades, seeds, tools, and so on for the farm, without really planning it, there was a gameplay loop. From there, I added more NPCs, added a fishing system, because all farming games need to have fishing, implemented a bunch of quests to keep the player incentivized to explore, and tried to make the town and other explorable areas as interesting as possible. I added more crops, more recipes, and a randomly generated mine system. With the mines came forging equipment and building better farm upgrades, placeable processing and crafting objects like workbenches and furnaces, and, well, you get the idea. It was now a full-fledged farming game with horror RPG elements. With this new farming and life sim direction, I decided to tune down the difficulty of the encounters and fine-tune the balance between farming and exploration and combat, with some alpha testing by members of the Discord community, link in the description. I further tweaked and tuned, fixed bugs, and added content to fill gaps and address complaints and feedback. And if you're wondering how long all of this took, well, about 1 year. This brings us right around to where we are now. The alpha demo of the game was finished, and not long ago it was released on Steam and itch.io. Feedback poured in once it went live, and even more balancing, quality of life features, new mechanics, and bug fixes have been implemented since. As it stands, I'm really proud of how the game looks and feels, and I'm more excited than ever to continue development and expand the town, add more areas to explore, and add new crops and recipes, and layer more goals, lore, story, and character into the world. If the game seems like something you're interested in, go give it a try. It's completely free to play the demo on Steam and itch, and I also have a Patreon set up where patrons can keep playing alpha builds of the game as I develop it, testing out all the new areas and features as they get added. If there's one thing that I hope anybody takes from this video, it's that you really don't need to know how to do everything if you want to make games. Start by taking stock of what you can do and plan a route that emphasizes what you're good at, while minimizing what you're bad at. Learn more as you go and expand your scope accordingly. The amazing games that many of us grew up with, for the Game Boy or NES, were practically made on calculators by today's standards, and the developers made it work by having great ideas despite the limitations. I've seen cool games made in PowerPoint, even. And that wraps up this long, catch-up devlog. In the future, I'll keep you up to date on the game's development as it progresses, and I might even make some more niche videos about how I've managed some of the technical elements of the game in the RPG Maker engine. What would you like to see? Have any questions? Let me know in the comments, and I'll try to cover them in future videos. Bye for now, keep it spooky, and I'll see you in Elderfield.